We are going to talk about Matthew's version of the Christmas story. Okay, so you probably know the story, but I'm going to try and fill in some of the background information just so you have a fuller understanding of the climate of the events happening around the Christmas story. So chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2, it starts verse 1 and says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem." So let's just stop there. So it mentions King Herod. And this is he's also known as Herod the Great. Herod the Great. There are several Herods that are mentioned throughout the New Testament, but this is Herod the Great. Julius Caesar appointed his father Antipater to be the governor of Judea under Roman occupation. Antipater then managed to have his son Herod appointed governor up north in Galilee. And when the Parthians, that was a large empire that stretched from modern-day Iran and went in and captured Syria and down into Judea and so forth. When the Parthians attacked Judea, Herod escaped to Egypt in the south, and then he went to Rome, and he hid out in Rome for a while. In 40 BC, the Romans declared Herod to be the king of the Jews. And so that's kind of them saying, okay, Herod, we want this territory back. You're the king. Now go get it. And they gave him the resources. And Herod was a great military leader, a very crafty military strategist. And he went and he drove the Parthians out. Now, Herod was not Jewish. And so he was concerned about how the Jews would receive him and accept him as being king of the Jews. And so he married a woman by the name of Mariamne. She was a descendant of the Maccabean Jewish kings and high priests. And Herod had killed off most of her family. We'll talk about Herod kind of being a bloodthirsty guy too. But Herod killed off most of her family as competition. But Mariamne's mother arranged for her marriage to Herod because the mother was trying to preserve the family line. She didn't want the entire family killed off, and so she figured if I can get my daughter married to Herod, at least some of us will be allowed to live. Herod agreed to marry her because she was considered a very beautiful woman and because he thought it would make him more readily accepted by the Jewish people. Now, Herod was a politician. He was a military leader, he was a king, and he was a crafty politician. In times of severe economic hardship, he gave back some of the tax money that had been collected from the Jewish people. During a great famine in 25 BC, he melted down some of the gold that was in the palace in order to be able to buy food for the poor. He built theaters and racetracks and other structures to provide entertainment for the people. And in 19 BC, he began the restoration and expansion of the temple. Now, perhaps you remember the first temple was Solomon's temple, and that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. When they came in and destroyed Jerusalem, they destroyed the temple, and they carried the people of Jerusalem and Judah captive back into Babylon. Then the book of Ezra tells the story of those captives being allowed to return to Jerusalem. And when they came back to Jerusalem, they rebuilt a temple known as Zerubbabel's temple, or the second temple. And perhaps you remember when we went through some of the prophets and so forth, how when the layout of the second temple was put on the ground, some of the people were really excited because they were young enough that they didn't remember Solomon's temple. But the people who were old enough to remember Solomon's temple stood there and wept, because this temple was so much smaller than Solomon's temple and not as ornate or beautiful as Solomon's temple when it was completed. And so Herod decided that he would restore and expand the second temple. And Herod wanted to build something bigger than Solomon's temple, and he certainly did. The Jews feared that Herod was going to tear the temple down when the work started, but for the next 60-some years, the temple was added on to and by different leaders and rulers, and it was beautified. Herod also revived Samaria. Remember, it was Judea in the south, Samaria in the middle, Galilee in the north. He worked hard with Samaria and reviving Samaria. He built a beautiful port city of Caesarea Maritime. Some of you maybe have been to the Holy Lands, a gorgeous city. You can go online and you can look at it, built right there on the Mediterranean Sea. He greatly improved the cities of Beirut, Damascus, Tyre, Sidon, and Rhodes, and he even made contributions to the city of Athens. He built the fortress of Masada. Maybe you've heard of Masada. In 73 AD, nearly 1,000 Jewish defenders committed suicide at Masada rather than allow themselves to be captured by the Roman general Flavius Silva. So Herod is called Herod the Great because of all of these building projects, all of the expansion, all of the beautification. He really did some amazing things and spent a ton of money doing it. But Herod was also cruel and merciless. He was a raving narcissist, perhaps to the point of paranoia. Herod feared that his brother-in-law, the high priest Aristobulus, was a threat, and so Herod had him drowned. And then, after he had him drowned, Herod paid for this huge, ornate funeral. And throughout the entire funeral, Herod pretended to weep. He then had his wife, Mariamne, killed. And then he had Mariamne's mother and 2 of his own sons killed. 5 days before Herod's death, about a year after Jesus was born, Herod had another of his sons executed. He just thought they were threats. One of the greatest pieces of evidence of Herod's narcissism and sick thinking was that he had most of the distinguished citizens of Jerusalem arrested and held in prison when he knew that he was sick and near to death. And Herod knew the Jews would not mourn his death, and so he gave orders that all of those prisoners were to be executed as soon as word came that Herod had died, because he knew Jerusalem would not mourn for him, and he wanted there to be mourning in Jerusalem. And so that's what happened. So I guess it really shouldn't surprise us that this man would have all the baby boys in Bethlehem killed because he saw them as a threat to the throne. You know, we read that and we think, oh, that's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Well, not if you know Herod. It's pretty much in keeping with his character. It's who the guy was.